Infinitive is a grammatical term referring to certain verb forms existing in many languages. As with many linguistic concepts, there is not a single definition applicable to all languages. The word is derived from late Latin, modus infinitivus, a derivative of infinitus meaning infinite. They are most often used as non-finite verbs. In traditional descriptions of English, the infinitive is the basic dictionary form of a verb when used non-finitely, with or without the particle to. Thus to go is an infinitive, as is go in a sentence like, I must go there. The form without to is called the bare infinitive, and the form with to is called the full infinitive or to infinitive. In many other languages the infinitive is a single word, often with the characteristic inflective ending, like morir in Spanish, manger eat in French, porta carry in Latin, lieben love in German, etc. However, some languages have no forms which can be considered to be infinitives. Many Native American languages and some languages in Africa and Australia do not have direct equivalents to infinitives or verbal nouns. In their place they use finite verb forms in ordinary clauses or various special constructions. Being a verb, an infinitive may take objects and other complements and modifiers to form a verb phrase. Like other non-finite verb forms, infinitives do not generally have an expressed subject, thus an infinitive verb phrase also constitutes a complete, non-finite clause, called an infinitive clause. Such phrases or clauses may play a variety of roles within sentences, often being nouns, and sometimes being adverbs or other types of modifier. Infinitives are not usually inflected for tense, person, etc. Infinitive phrases and clauses. An infinitive phrase is a verb phrase constructed with the verb in infinitive form. This consists of the verb together with its objects and other complements and modifiers. Some examples of infinitive phrases in English are given below. These may be based on either the full infinitive or the bare infinitive. Sleep. Write 10 letters. Go to the store for a pound of sugar. Infinitive phrases often have an implied grammatical subject, making them effectively clauses rather than phrases. Such infinitive clauses or infinitival clauses are one of several kinds of non-finite clause. They can play various grammatical roles like a constituent of a larger clause or sentence. For example, it may form a noun phrase or adverb. Infinitival clauses may be embedded within each other in complex ways, like in the sentence, I want to tell you that Brett Favor is going to get married. Here the infinitival clause to get married is contained within the finite dependent clause that Brett Favor is going to get married. This in turn is contained within another infinitival clause, which is contained in the finite independent clause. The grammatical structure of an infinitival clause may differ from that of a corresponding finite clause. For example, in German, the infinitive form of the verb usually goes to the end of its clause, whereas a finite verb typically comes in second position. Infinitive clauses with subject in the objective case. Following certain verbs or prepositions, infinitives commonly do have an expressed subject, e.g., I want him to eat their dinner. For him to fail now would be a disappointment. As these examples illustrate, the subject of the infinitive is in the objective case, in contrast to the nominative case that would be used with a finite verb, e.g., they ate their dinner. Such accusative and infinitive constructions are present in Latin and Ancient Greek, as well as many modern languages. The unusual case for the subject of an infinitive is an example of exceptional case marking, where the infinitive clause's role being an object of a verb or preposition overpowers the pronoun's subjective role within the clause, marking for tense, aspect and voice. In some languages, infinitives may be marked for grammatical categories like voice, aspect, and to some extent tense. This may be done by inflection, like with the Latin perfect and passive infinitives, or by periphrasis, like with the Latin future infinitives or the English perfect and progressive infinitives. Latin has present, perfect and future infinitives, with active and passive forms of each. For details see Latin conjugation. Infinitives. English has infinitive constructions which are marked for aspect, perfect, progressive, or a combination of the two. These can also be marked for passive voice. Eat, be eaten, have been eaten, be eating, be being eaten, have been eating, have been being eaten. Further constructions can be made with other auxiliary-like expressions, like be going to eat or be about to eat, which have future meaning. For more examples of the above types of construction, see uses of English verb forms. Perfect and progressive non-finite constructions. Perfect infinitives are also found in other European languages which have perfect forms with auxiliaries similarly to English. For example, avoir mangé means have eaten in French. English. Regarding English, the term infinitive is traditionally applied to the unmarked form of the verb when it forms a non-finite verb, whether or not introduced by the particle to. Hence sit and to sit, like used in the following sentences, would each be considered an infinitive. I can sit here all day. I want to sit on the other chair. The form without to is called the bare infinitive. The form introduced by to is called the full infinitive or to infinitive. The other non-finite verb forms in English are the gerund or present participle, and the past participle. These are not considered infinitives. Moreover, the unmarked form of the verb is not considered an infinitive when it forms a finite verb, like a present indicative, subjunctive, or imperative. Certain auxiliary verbs are defective in that they do not have infinitives. This applies to the modal verbs, as well as certain related auxiliaries like the had of had better and the used of used to. Be able to for can, and have to for must. It also applies to the auxiliary do, like used in questions. Negatives and emphasis like described under do support. However, the auxiliary verbs have and be both commonly appear in the infinitive. I should have finished by now. It's thought to have been a burial site. Let him be released. I hope to be working tomorrow. Huddleston and Pullum's Cambridge Grammar of the English Language does not use the notion of the infinitive, only that of the infinitive clause, noting that English uses the same form of the verb, the plain form, in infinitive clauses that it uses in imperative and present subjunctive clauses. A matter of controversy among prescriptive grammarians and style writers has been the appropriateness of separating the two words of the to infinitive. For details of this, see split infinitive. Modern linguistic theories typically do not consider the to infinitive to be a distinct constituent, instead regarding the scope of the particle to cover an entire verb phrase. Thus, to buy a car is past like to buy a car, rather not like to buy a car. Uses of the infinitive. The bare infinitive and the to infinitive have a variety of uses in English. The two forms are mostly in complementary distribution. Certain contexts call for one, and certain contexts for the other. They are not normally interchangeable, except in occasional instances like after the verb help, where either can be used. The main uses of infinitives are like follows. As complements of other verbs. The bare infinitive is former complement of the dummy auxiliary do. Most modal auxiliary verbs, verbs of perception like see, watch and hear, and the verbs of permission or causation make, bid, let, and have. The to infinitive is used after many intransitive verbs like want, aim, like, fail, etc., and like a second complement after a direct object in the case of verbs like want, convince, aim, etc. In various particular expressions, like had better and would rather, in order to, as if to, am to, is to, are to. As a noun phrase, expressing its action or state in an abstract, general way, from the subject of a clause or form a predicative expression. To err is human, to know me is to love me. The bare infinitive can be used in such sentences like, what you should do is make a list. A common construction with the to infinitive involves a dummy pronoun subject, with the infinitive phrase placed after the predicate. It was nice to meet you. Adverbially, to express purpose, intent or result, the to infinitive can have the meaning of in order to, as a modifier of a noun or adjective. This may relate to the meaning of the noun or adjective, or it may form a type of non-finite relative clause, like in the man to save us, the method to use, nice to listen to. In elliptical questions, I don't know where to go, after why the bare infinitive is used. Why reveal it? The infinitive is also the usual dictionary form or citation form of a verb. The form listed in dictionaries is the bare infinitive, although the to infinitive is often used in referring to verbs or in defining other verbs. The word amble means to walk slowly. How do we conjugate the verb to go? For further detail and examples of the uses of infinitives in English, see bare infinitive and to infinitive in the article on uses of English verb forms. Other Germanic languages. The original Proto-Germanic ending of the infinitive was -en, with verbs derived from other words ending in -jan or -janen. In German it is -en, with the -ln or -ern endings on a few words based on -l or -r roots. The use of "do" with infinitives is similar to English "to", but is less frequent than in English. German infinitives can form nouns, often expressing abstractions of the action, in which case they are of neuter gender. Das Essen means the eating, but also the food. In Dutch infinitives also end in "n", sometimes used with te similar to English "to", e.g., het is niet moeilijk te begrijpen. It is not hard to understand. The few verbs with stems ending in "a" have infinitives in "n". Afrikaans has lost the distinction between the infinitive and present forms of verbs, with the exception of the verbs wees, which admits the present form is, and the verb he, whose present form is het. In North Germanic languages the final "n" was lost from the infinitive as early as 500–540 AD, reducing the suffix to "a". Later it has been further reduced to "e" in Danish and some Norwegian dialects. In the majority of Eastern Norwegian dialects and a few bordering Western Swedish dialects the reduction to "e" was only partial, leaving some infinitives in "a" and others in "e". In northern parts of Norway the infinitive suffix is completely lost or only the "a" is kept. The infinitives of these languages are inflected for passive voice through the addition of "s" or "sein" to the active form. This suffix appearance in Old Norse was a contraction of "mick" or "sick" and was originally expressing reflexive actions. Karla calls plus "sick" greater than Karlis calls himself. The suffixes "mk" and "sk" later merged to "s", which evolved to "saint" in the Western dialects. The loss or reduction of "a" in active voice in Norwegian did not occur in the passive forms, except for some dialects that have "s". The other North Germanic languages have the same vowel in both forms. Latin and Romance languages. For example, in Italian infinitives end in "r", rre, or "ia", and in arsi, rsi, rsi, irsi for the reflexive forms. In Spanish and Portuguese, infinitives end in "r", or "ir", while similarly in French they typically end in "re", oir, and "ir". In Romanian the so-called long infinitives end in "r", ir, and they are converted into verbal nouns by articulation, disambiguation needed. The short infinitives used in verbal contexts have the endings a, each, e, and I. In Romanian, the infinitive is usually replaced by a clause containing the conjunction sa plus the subjunctive mood. The only verb that is modal in common modern Romanian is the verb a puti, to be able to. However, in popular speech the infinitive after a puti is also increasingly replaced by the subjunctive. In all Romance languages, infinitives can also form nouns. Latin infinitives challenged several of the generalizations about infinitives. They did inflect for voice and for aspect, and allowed for an overt expression of the subject. See Latin conjugation. Infinitives. Romance languages inherited from Latin the possibility of an overt expression of the subject. Moreover, the inflected infinitive found in Portuguese and Galician inflects for person and number. These are the only Indo-European languages that allow infinitives to take person and number endings. This helps to make infinitive clauses very common in these languages. For example, the English finite clause "in order that you, she, we have" would be translated to Portuguese like "para teres, ela ter, termos." The Portuguese personal infinitive has no proper tenses, only aspects, but tenses can be expressed using periphrastic structures. For instance, even though you sing, have sung, are going to sing could be translated to apesar de cantares, teres cantado, ias cantar. Other Romance languages allow uninflected infinitives to combine with overt nominative subjects. For example, Spanish alabria yo los ojos or sin yo sabelo. Hellenic languages. Ancient Greek. In Ancient Greek the infinitive has 4 tenses and 3 voices. Unique forms for the middle are found only in the future and aorist. In the present imperfect, middle and passive are the same. Thematic verbs form present active infinitives by adding to the stem the theme vowel epsilon and the infinitive ending epsilon nu, and contract to form an epsilon iota nu ending, e.g., pi alpha iota delta epsilon 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 iota nu. Athematic verbs add the sole suffix nu alpha iota instead, e.g., delta iota delta omicron nu alpha iota. In the middle voice, the present middle infinitive ending is sigma theta alpha iota, e.g., delta iota delta omicron sigma theta alpha iota, and thematic verbs add an additional epsilon between the ending and the stem, e.g., pi alpha iota delta epsilon 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 sigma theta alpha iota. Modern Greek. The infinitive per se does not exist in modern Greek. To see this, consider the ancient Greek theta epsilon lambda omega gamma rho alpha phi epsilon iota nu, I want to write. In modern Greek this become theta epsilon lambda omega nu alpha gamma rho alpha psi omega, I want that I write. In modern Greek, the infinitive has thus changed form and is used mainly in the formation of tenses and not with an article or alone. Instead of the ancient Greek infinitive gamma rho alpha phi epsilon iota nu, modern Greek uses the aorist infinitive gamma rho alpha psi epsilon iota, which does not inflect. The modern Greek infinitive has only 2 forms according to voice. For example, gamma rho alpha psi epsilon iota for the active voice and gamma rho alpha phi epsilon iota for the passive voice. Balto-Slavic languages. The infinitive in Russian usually ends in t, preceded by a thematic vowel, or t. If not preceded by one, some verbs have a stem ending in a consonant and change the t to c, like asterisk mote, moc, can. Some other Balto-Slavic languages have the infinitive typically ending in, for example, c in Polish, t in Slovak, t in Czech in Latvian, Thai in Ukrainian, in Belarusian. Lithuanian infinitives end in t, Slovenian end on t or ci, and Croatian on t or ci. Serbian officially retains infinitives t or ci, but is more flexible than the other Slavs in breaking the infinitive through a clause. The infinitive nevertheless remains the dictionary form. Bulgarian and Macedonian have lost the infinitive altogether. For that reason, the present first-person singular conjugation is the dictionary form in Bulgarian, while Macedonian uses the third-person singular form of the verb in present tense. Biblical Hebrew. Hebrew has 2 infinitives, the infinitive absolute and the infinitive construct. The infinitive construct is used after prepositions and is inflected with pronominal endings to indicate its subject or object. Icto pacifer, when the scribe wrote, aher lecto, after his going. When the infinitive construct is preceded by to, it has a similar meaning to the English to infinitive, and this is its most frequent use in modern Hebrew. The infinitive absolute is used for verb focus, like in moth-yamath. This usage is commonplace in the Bible, but in modern Hebrew it is restricted to high-flown literary works. Note, however, that the to infinitive of Hebrew is not the dictionary form, that is the third-person singular perfect form.